Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Carrese, welcoming you to Raise the Line with Osmosis from Elsevier, an ongoing exploration about how to improve health and healthcare. Today's guest, Dr. David Grew, is right up our alley here at Osmosis because he believes, as we do, in the power of using video as a learning tool. In the case of Dr. Grew and his company PRIMR, custom animated videos are created and distributed to spread awareness of clinical trials and to educate patients about cancer. Dr. Grew is a board-certified radiation oncologist based in Connecticut and the founder and CEO of PRIMR. And we're looking forward to tapping his blend of medical expertise and patient-centered insights on today's episode. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
We love to know more about our guests, kind of what drove them to the path that they're on. So what's your story about getting interested in medicine and then particularly oncology?
Sure. So actually had initially planned to go to college to study business, but as sort of a last-ditch effort, my mom encouraged me to instead enroll in the liberal arts college at the undergrad school I went to, which was Fordham University in the Bronx. And that ended up being a good choice because once there, I had always loved science. So I decided to go pre-med, and I said, well, let's just ride this wave as long as I can. If I fail out, whatever. I didn't feel like there was I didn't feel like I had much to lose, to be honest, but I really enjoyed it along the way there as an undergrad. That was when like the early seeds of having some ideas about creating a digital product to help people learn with images came to me almost always when I was studying biochemistry or physics. I was creating these drawings for myself as my own study aids. And I'd be holed up in the library all by myself, but creating reams and reams of paper with these visual maps to understand how biochemical pathways flow or physics problems can get solved. And I had the beginning of some ideas about how you could turn this into an animated product to help other pre-meds who would come behind me have an easier time studying, but never really went anywhere. I didn't have any time. I didn't have any money. And so it just kind of fluttered away. But ended up going to medical school down at Tulane in New Orleans. And for some extra money during med school, I got a job teaching undergrads how to take the MCAT at a whiteboard. So it was kind of like the standard, stand in front of the classroom and solving problems at a whiteboard using different colors. And I really loved that. And I continued to do it as I studied through med school. And then really just carried that practice of using simple visual aids into my own practice of medicine, where I just standardly, when I see a new patient who has cancer, I'll get the paper out or on the exam table paper, just flip the consent form around and just draw right there. Here's your lungs, here's your heart, here's where the tumor is. These are the kind of treatment options we have. And I just noticed that patients, when they saw that would really allow them to intuit what kinds of treatments they would need and also what kinds of side effects. And so all of these things swirling around kind of came to a head at the beginning of COVID because there was a real need to create scalable digital products so that you could include family members in the conversation. And that's really when the business kind of took off.
Yeah, that's a good point because everybody was sort of remote and needing to find a way to be educated and help make decisions for their loved ones and so forth. Before pursuing that, so why radiation oncology as a path?
When I was a third-year med student, I was doing my rotation on internal medicine, and we had admitted a woman to the hospital who had massive ascites. And it was unclear what was going on, but we were pretty sure she had a new cancer diagnosis. And ultimately, we did diagnose her with ovarian cancer. And I just remember, I had thought I was going to go into internal medicine. I just remember the team kind of high-fiving each other like, we got it, and I was sort of scratching my head like, well, this journey is just starting for this patient, And so I ended up following her once she got discharged into the oncology clinic, and I started going to the tumor boards, which for those who don't know, it's a really cool thing that's pretty standard across the country, where it's a multidisciplinary standing meeting, usually once a week for a certain disease site, like in her case, gynecologic oncology. And all the docs are there. The radiologist is there to present the images. Pathologist is there to show slides from the biopsy. Medical oncology, surgical oncology, radiation oncology. And I just was totally hooked. I was like, this is so cool. All these docs in the same room talking about one patient all at once. It was just a phenomenal way to collaborate and practice medicine as a team. And so after we kind of established care for her case, I kept going to these meetings every week. I would kind of sneak away from rounds and go and attend these conferences. And I started to develop a sense of like what each of those team members was really responsible for. And just like a multiple choice test, just sort of one by one was eliminating each of the other roles. So radiologist, he doesn't seem to really ever see patients, and the pathologist is certainly not. And I liked talking to patients, and the surgery seemed cool, but I didn't want to spend that much time in the OR. I never really knew where to put my hands. So and medical oncology was just too much medicine for me, to be honest. And so radiation oncology seemed like the nice blend of anatomy, patient care, multidisciplinary care. So I started doing some shadowing in that department, and I just loved it. It was a lot of physics, it's a lot of geometry, but there's also a lot of like very practical bedside conversations that happen. And so I kind of took off from there. I went and did some rotations at other institutions. I went to rotate up at Yale and NYU and really just solidified my interest.
Well, that all makes sense, and it's really one of the cool things about medicine is, there's so many paths you can take and different ways to kind of scratch your itches. So let's get back to the story of kind of developing tools for people to help understand their situation and their care and also their family members. Talk about how, COVID kind of kicked that off in a way.
Sure. So, as you recall, there were these no visitor policies. So, patients, even though they had a new diagnosis of cancer, they had to come alone, which in retrospect is kind of nuts. I mean, it's almost torturous. This patient is face to face with their mortality for the first time, and they are going to meet with an oncologist. They're going to have to trust to put their lives in their hands, and they're alone. And it's not an optimal environment for knowledge transfer or knowledge retention. So, it was pretty clear to me. I mean, at a baseline, oncologists can see the deer in headlights look. They recognize that on patients' faces. But COVID just really exacerbated that. It was obvious that patients were not retaining much. So these little hand-drawn images that I was making became that much more important. And I noticed that patients began to start asking me if they could keep them. And I'm looking at it, it's just this scribbled mess by the time I'm done with it. Usually the value of it is the act of doing it, right? In the end, it just looks like a bunch of pen scribbles on paper. So I was wondering why they wanted to keep it. And a few patients said to me, well, I'm going to have to go home and explain all this to my family. There's no way I'm going to be able to do it. So I'm going to bring this piece of paper and that will hopefully help me. And then the light bulb went off. I need to digitize these so that we can have this more bespoke, custom educational moment between a doctor and a patient and do it at scale so that patients can be involved. They can understand what I'm saying to them. And so I started converting like the most common explanations I would give my patients across a variety of malignancies: prostate cancer, breast, lung, other CNS malignancies, and created a library of about 50 2 to 3 minute long videos that patients could consume either ahead of their appointment with me or in the clinic while they're waiting or at home and share with patients across the country or share with their family across the country. And the response was great. They loved it. They seemed to really like it. I was getting calls from family members who were in California saying, I didn't understand what was going on, but this was really helpful. Now I can support my family members. So I knew that the spark of creating some value or solving a problem for somebody was there. But around the same time, PIs, the principal investigators who were in my network for clinical trials, saw what I was doing just from what I was posting on social media. And they came to me and said, we have this complex oncology trial. It is very hard to explain to patients. Not only that, we need to standardize a good explanation and distribute it at scale across these 40 or 50 sites that will be enrolling patients. And so we want you to create a video for it. And that was how this just sort of project that I was doing became a business.
So two things I'm interested in. One is that, how did you basically operationalize this? You're not a trained animator or artist. What program were you using to create these in the first place? And secondly, obviously this is in the end about educating people. So what skill set were you drawing on to know how to do this and educate in a way that it would have an impact and would stick with people?
Sure. So I just bought an iPad and started noodling around what are the available simple software programs, iPad applications that I could use to basically narrate and then draw with an Apple Pen. Very simple drawings. And if you've seen them, especially the stuff that I was creating at the beginning, it's not polished. It's pretty rudimentary, and it's intentional. To be honest, it's meant to replicate the authenticity, but the quality of a physician-led explanation. And so it was just a simple iPad app that's called Explain Everything. And I've worked with them the whole time. I still do all of my storyboarding with that application. I got to know the CEO, and they're a phenomenal company. And so that's the tool that I use. I got this Blue Yeti mic and an Apple Pen and an iPad, and it was all in maybe $1,500 or something.
Amazing.
Yeah. So you don't need much if you really do have sort of the experience or the knowledge that you want to share with somebody else. Doesn't matter if you're a construction site manager or an oncologist or a school teacher. If you have the drive to create an educational piece of content, you don't need very sophisticated tools to do that and distribute it these days, which is phenomenal. So what was your second question?
So just the educational piece of it, I mean, how did you know how to communicate in a way that was going to reach people and that they would and know that it would be effective?
Yeah. So for sure, the answer to that is through thousands of conversations with patients, where over the years, patients would just, you develop a sense of what part of an explanation trips people up, or what part of an explanation you can see you've lost someone. You develop a sense of what the follow-up questions are, to over time kind of iterate and tighten up like what makes a good quality education, what are the elements of a good quality explanation for cancer. And I couldn't tell you that there was any sort of formulaic way of doing it at the beginning. It was really just based on the feedback from my own patients, just from practicing and paying attention to what landed with them and what confused them.
So as the years have gone on and you've gotten more experience doing this sort of thing, have you stayed with that pretty simple approach?
It is pretty basic. That's sort of a core principle of what we're trying to build, which is to keep it as simple as possible. The headline on our landing page for our website is simple cancer explanations. I believe that complex explanations are probably masking some level of misunderstanding or some lack of knowledge on the side of the explainer. If you can't explain it like to a fifth grader, say, then you probably don't understand it that well yourself. And so we really just are trying to keep the images themselves and then the words, the script, as simple as possible to make any person who walks in off the street be able to understand even the most complex clinical trial. So we, over time, have kind of developed a, a formula for how you can get to achieve that goal. But at its core, it's really based on simplicity and based on like the years of feedback from actual patients.
Well, speaking of feedback, what kind of feedback do you get from the folks who are running the trials and patients? What is it that seems to really resonate with them?
Well, I think it does get back to the simplicity. And so it becomes something that even it works both for the person who has a fifth grade education level, who comes in off the street and is, gone through a few lines of treatment and now only has clinical trial options. They're able to understand these trials where the prior alternative was a 40-page informed consent, which is written in legalese, which is obviously a terrible alternative and a really suboptimal way to recruit patients' participation on trials. And that's so important, not just for their benefit, but for the benefit of future patients. And it needs to be a group of participants who represent a broad swath of the population. Because if we just test a drug or a device on one small segment of society that's super selected for the highest education level, the means and the ability to travel and the social support to travel to enroll on trials, then we've only verified that that drug or device is safe and effective for that tiny group of people. We haven't really established that it works at scale across an entire population. So we need to be able to recruit patients on trials who have a variety of backgrounds. And that is the feedback that we're getting from sites and from real patients who are watching the videos, is that, I understand this, and it establishes a level of trust and credibility that's so important at the beginning stages of a conversation about enrolling on a clinical trial.
I'm curious to what extent your audience is other providers. And I bring that up because burnout has been a big topic on this program. And we've heard from other providers that part of the burnout can stem from doing patient education in a really inefficient way and having to go over the same information with patient after patient after patient. And, they've asked for resources like this from Osmosis, or we've talked about other ways that this can be approached. So I'm just wondering if you see this as helping in some way or fitting into part of the answer to the puzzle of provider burnout.
Exactly. I mean, burnout is real. It's happening left and right. And I think the latest statistics are something like 40 or 50% of current physicians are thinking about exiting the field in the next 3 to 5 years. So it's a horrible, horrible state of affairs as far as burnout goes. So anything that we can do that is able to still deliver high quality patient care, but reduce some of the burden on providers is worth pursuing aggressively and pouring resources into. And we've seen, so one site that we've worked with quite a bit is New York Presbyterian and Cornell. And we've done, I think at this point, about 6 trials with them that they have open at that site, and a variety of investigator initiated trials, some NCI funded large cooperative group studies, and then also industry sponsored trials. So, kind of from each category of clinical trials. And they basically have established a workflow where patients are identified earlier in the process of their journey to meet through with all of the different subspecialists in the cancer center. And they're presented with the content to explain the clinical trial options earlier in the process, so that when they get to the conversation with the specialist, they're very well versed in what the options are. They understand the trial, and in many cases, it seems they've already kind of self-selected to participate on that trial. So that, what does that do for the provider? It makes it so that the provider doesn't have to then, when they've got 5 other people waiting for them in other clinic rooms, spend the 15 minutes to give that good explanation that any patient needs and deserves to establish the trust and credibility that's necessary to move to the next step towards enrolling on the trial. So we basically have built a tool for them that has zero cost of replication and that scales infinitely across all of the trial sites and across their clinics, that is still delivering an excellent patient experience and is really just accelerating the time to treatment, the time to enrollment.
So you mentioned scaling a few times. I'm curious about how the company is doing, like, and what your vision is, how many different kinds of subject areas you're trying to get into, and how many physicians and trials you're trying to reach. What's the ambition?
It's a big ambition. I think every clinical trial should have short form video that's very simple lay language with simple images and animation, like what we build at PRIMR. Um, I'm not saying I want to take over the world. I'm just saying I think patients they deserve that. I think that should be just absolutely a standard. And like I said earlier, the alternative right now is the 40-page legalese informed consent form. And so that's just a lousy way to do it. So I'm kind of on a mission to correct that and make sure that patients have an easy way to understand these trials. So we're starting with oncology. That's our beachhead. That's my specialty, but that's where about 40% of the work of clinical trials is taking place, which makes sense, right? I mean, this is a huge problem. It's one of the leading killers internationally. And so it makes sense to do a lot of the clinical trial work in that disease. So that's where we're starting. And right now we're very nimble and international team. So we have a combination of some full-time workers and some contract workers across a variety of roles in the business. And I still practice medicine too. I'm in a practice in Connecticut. So we we have, graphics designers, we have folks who help us with sales and outbound and revenue generation, like business development type things. We have people who help with language, foreign language narration. and translation services. And then we have general administrative workers in the business too. So it's becoming a growing and more robust business, and we're excited to continue to scale. It's super fun, and we think we're solving a big problem. So we're going for it.
So as you know, Osmosis is also in the business of making educational videos, and we always like to ask our guests to provide us with some direction. Here we have this audience of millions of medical students and other learners at our fingertips, if you will. What would you have us educate them about? What's something that's missing in medical education right now? What's something that you really think is interesting that more folks in their position should know more about?
That's a great question. I think clinical trials are really like the great frontier. And I think that as medical students, we're really responsible for understanding like this, the rock solid foundation. And so that's definitely that's where you guys probably should be building. But I think having some early exposure to some of the broader categories that have really exciting clinical trial work being done would probably be a fun area to build, because fundamentally those things are grounded on basics of, medical school level education. So one area that I'm learning a lot about right now that's really fun is radiopharmaceuticals. And it's just, I think for medical students, it would be really interesting to learn a little bit of basic information about radiopharmaceuticals, not only because it's combining sort of molecular targeting with antibodies, which is obviously core to any sort of targeted therapy, but it's also bringing that in with radioactive materials, which have been a huge field of medicine, nuclear medicine, for diagnostic purposes. And so what radiopharmaceuticals are doing now is they're tagging these one sticky end to a certain molecule in the body that will help them tag like a prostate cancer cell, for instance, and then it will light up with a radioactive glow for a PSMA PET scan. That's a diagnostic application. But then there's also therapeutic applications where you can swap out the low dose radioactive compound that will help you for diagnostic purposes and stick in a very high energy radioactive compound that will actually destroy prostate cancer. And so it's just a really interesting and exciting field. And there's a lot of companies, biotech companies, building not just for prostate cancer, but they've really built sort of a platform technology across which you can easily swap out the sticky end and then put in different payloads of different kinds of radioactive materials that a lot of people think, myself included, could have major implications for the way we approach metastatic cancer in the future.
Unbelievable. I'm listening to you thinking this is just science fiction,
I know. I know. It's pretty wild stuff.
Either it could be a tracer or it could be, the thing that ends up killing the. Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing stuff.
Yeah. Theranostics, they call it. So it's therapy and diagnostics, and you can have the same sticky end, but switch out the payload. It's pretty neat.
Incredible.
And you can see how something like that, to explain that to a patient without visuals, is almost impossible.
Sure.
And it sounds terrifying, right? Wait a minute, you're injecting liquid radioactive material in my body? I'm not sure about that. So, but when you can show it, and you can show, an image of metastatic cancer and then a sticky end that's going to go and attach to that, and then while it's there, it's releasing radioactive material, that's very compelling. That's actually something you might want to do.
Yeah, I want that, doc.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So a little education can go a long way for recruitment.
Right. We're running out of time here. I do want to give you a chance to answer our one of our favorite questions, which is that, as I mentioned, we have kind of a younger audience, a learning audience. What's your advice generally to them about approaching their careers? And I'm thinking people are listening to your story and like, man, how did this guy figure out how to create this entirely different part of his medical, life, this other mission of education? So what would you say?
So the most important thing for me has been to just discard the fear of public failure in front of all of your colleagues and your peers. That is something that is really drilled into us from pre-med through med school, internship, residency, and then in your career, right? Failing publicly is something that we feel could or would ruin us. I think you can ruin your reputation if you start doing things that you show that you lack integrity. But I think the downside risk for doing things like trying to build something big is way less than people think. I think that taking a risk and discarding your fear of failure and just getting started is how everybody who's trying to build something, that's the first step. You can't build something big or small if you're afraid of what people will think of it, because you're going to be wrong 1,000 times before you get something right, and you just need to not care about that. So I would encourage anyone who's thinking about doing something a little different, doing something unique, going down a slightly maybe parallel but slightly different path than the one that's carved out for them historically, is just go ahead and let go of that fear and do it for yourself. You only live once. You don't have much time here, so just go for it.
That's terrific advice and a great way to end. I really want to thank you for your time today, Dr. Grew. It's been a fascinating conversation, and wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, thanks. And I'd encourage any of your listeners to reach out if you have any questions. I'm happy to help.
What's the best way for them to do that?
So I'm on LinkedIn, pretty active there, a little bit less active on Twitter. It's Dr. Grew on Twitter, and LinkedIn, it's just my name. And I'll just give my email too. It's just my first name and last name. So it's David Grew at PRIMR Med, and PRIMR is no E, so it's PRIMRmed.com.
All right, we'll be sure to put all of that in the show notes, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from some folks. At least I hope you will. With that, I'm Michael Carrese. Thanks for checking out today's show, and remember to do your part to raise the line and strengthen the healthcare system. We're all in this together.
If you like this podcast, please share it on your social channels. You can also subscribe to the series and check out all of our episodes at osmosis.org/raisethelines podcast.